Jaz vas lepo pozdravljam. Moje ime je Katarina Vatovec, sem docentka na Evropski pravni fakulteti. Gostje. Bom nadaljevala v angleškem jeziku, v katerem poteka tudi forum. This was a quick introduction in the Slovene language. Now, first, I would like to welcome everybody for being with us here today. I think we have a nice group of people listening and hopefully also participating. This is yet another European Academic Forum, as we call it, and you well know it is conducted as part of the Jean Monnet chair, whose holder is Professor Matej Aubel. I think we are going to have an interesting debate, I'm sure. We will talk about the enlargement. Now, we had many events, and you also witnessed them, some of you, at Nove Univerze, dealing with an important milestone in Slovenia. It was 20 years ago that Slovenia became a member of the European Union. And then on the other hand, we have the European elections fast approaching. Today, we will not look so much not at all actually, at our enlargement process and our path to the European Union. We will instead debate the future EU enlargement and reflect on it. Now, I need to add that you can all participate. I would suggest, should you have a question for our panelists, to write them, please, in the Q&A section. And as always, you know that you're encouraged to do so. Today, perhaps even more, because we are surrounded by a very nice, wonderful group of ladies who are all experts in their respective fields. I think this is worth mentioning. So I have really the honor and privilege to welcome panelists who not only have knowledge, expertise, but also experience in the field of enlargement, or are even living the enlargement, if I can say so, witnessing the process and the effects this have on their country and on the society, their people as such. So let me briefly introduce our panelist. Fjoralba Caka is a lecturer of the European Union Law and EU Internal Market at the Faculty of Law, University of Tirana. And may I add, she also was a Deputy Minister of Justice, covering, among other things, European integration. She was actually the negotiator for the famous Chapter 23, and Chapter 23 of the EU Acquis is chapter that deals with judiciary and the fundamental rights. Then we have Natalija Shikova, who is a lawyer, but also an associate professor at the Faculty of Law at the International Balkan University, that is in Skopje, in North Macedonia, who is also has an academic background, if I may say so, in the enlargement as such, and the whole negotiation process. So we are really having people from practice as well as from academia, both. Last but not least, Kerry Longhurst is with us. Kerry is a Jean Monnet professor at Collegium Civitas, or as we would say, Collegium Civitas, in Warsaw, in Poland, but she's also a visiting professor in the College of Europe. And she also published and is an expert in, I would say, Eastern Partnership as well as EU enlargement. Now, on a personal note, and I said that to Kerry, and in the spirit of anniversaries, I have to say that before today, the last time I have seen Kerry was in 2003, which is a year before Slovenia acceded to the European Union. So another sort of like personal anniversary we have. Now, if I start with the debate, I was thinking, when I thought about the EU enlargement as such, I was thinking that the prevailing view, perhaps, is that this is a sort of a story of success. In particular, if we consider those countries that are already members of the European Union, this past enlargement, let's say. But I wonder if it is still considered as a success and as such from the point of view of the current candidate countries, or perhaps has the European Union in that regard, let's say, lost its credibility. So if we start with the North Macedonia, who has a status of a candidate country, I think, since 2005, and Natalija will correct me if I'm wrong. What happened? It's a long period since the granting of the status to North Macedonia. I wonder, at what stage is your negotiation process? How do you proceed? I know Macedonians were very much supportive of becoming part of the European Union, but after such a long time, is this still the case? Or they reconsider the benefits they could get out of being a member of the European Union? Please, Natalija.
Hi to all, I'm very happy to be here. Basically, this will be my perspective and a perspective from the different point of research. But in general, I will not say that the process is a failure or a success. As a result of this EU prospects, many reforms have been undertaken, and we have many changes that we receive as a result of it, due to different funds and different joint networks, etc. But from the other hand, the process is still not very successful. It proves to be very long, difficult, extremely complex, challenging, and in the end, with a lot of setbacks, and in the end, without a certain outcome that really affects us as a country. During the years, the process, my general impression is, and maybe the general public, that the process was mainly affected by the political consideration, instead of focused on these specific issues, or these issues that in fulfilling certain conditions and getting a country closer to the EU. So the main, let's say, focus was on those political issues, and they were just mainly presented into the political scene. So I will not point my finger and I will say which responsibility was that, but I would say that it can be put in two sides. And from the one side of the EU, let's say, incoherent EU policy in respect of the enlargement, if you see that EU is still an unfinished process, or the process that is going on, we cannot clearly say that this is for particular reason, but it simply comes because of its own structure and a way of functioning. And from the other side is the incapacity of the country to deliver what was expected. So let's say these two elements influence this process of the approximation, let's say, with the EU. However, these issues are mainly related, as they are pointed out, as issues connected with the rule of law, stability of the institutions, and various institutional reforms that should be forced in order to get, let's say, tangible results. But since the independence of in that time, Republic of Macedonia was always faced with a certain political constraints, with the dissolution, for example, from Yugoslavia, and the Bad Intercommission that was formed from the information of the student to basically assess if the country fulfills the criteria to be recognized. That was, let's say, set in the certain objective ground. The country entered into some certain political consideration, and because of the name dispute, the name issue, what we have later on with the neighbor Greece, this becomes an obstacle for the further recognition. The country changed the constitution in that time, claiming that does not have a territorial pretension over the neighbor. Later on was entered into the UN under the provisional reference of the former Yugoslav Republic of Macedonia. And the process, but in that time, the country strongly said the EU will, the will to become part of the EU, in that time, European communities, and to be part of the NATO. As a result, many of the, how can I say, the instruments were signed between the country and in the communities that should increase the economic situation, instead prepare the country to access the market. So let's say they are connected with a different economic consideration. Destabilization and association agreements have certain benefits and actually increase the process. The country in time get a status of a candidate country, of course. in time in 2000, after visa liberalization, got recommendation for opening negotiation, but first again faced the political consideration. Thus the process was again stopped and remained stopped in the consequent years. In the theory, there is something that called that political of conditionality didn't prove to have so much good results. In fact, have an opposite effect, because with these political constraints and this policy of conditionality basically raise another sentiments in the country. And as a result of these raised sentiments, we have the backsliding of the democracy, affected human rights, etc. And this, in that particular year, the recommendation for starting of negotiation was absent, but instead of that, to reformulate all the processes and to establish, to reconstruct the political society, which we did. So this led in that period of time of that what we call the capture state, or the state that is captured by the certain political elites for the name of the certain interest, when you don't have that European perspective to be very near to you, let's say to be more burdened by this political consideration. The name dispute was solved in 2018, we signing the Prespa agreement that opened the perspective to further, let's say, processes. The country was admitted to NATO. However, yet we face now another obstacle from the neighbor that have issues about language, Macedonian language, and then that affects directly the country's identity. And that dates back into some historical narratives from the 100 years ago. And the unfortunate thing is that these bilateral disputes are put within the negotiation framework, and that I think was it's a negative aspect from in the negotiation process, because per se in the beginning, EU was formed to solve the disputes of the country who were in time extremely in big conflicts. Now entering bilateral issues, and they're put as a precondition for solving, for moving the accession process. So the accession process is in some stage that was in a spirit of stagnation. There was a certain proposal, a French proposal, to introduce constitutional change. In that time, the ruling majority didn't get parliamentarian support. There's a huge reaction from the opposition, and basically the changes were never done. North Macedonia finished with a explanatory screening in December 2023, but we have formally started the negotiation, but we never opened any chapter so far. We had new elections just recently in the end of May, and a new political composition will be formed. The parliament is already in place. The government will be in the next 20 days, we expect, and we'll see how these processes will further going on. About the support of the general public, there is a recent, let's say, I saw a recent poll, and maybe I'll look here to let you know. Currently, general support for EU processes is 60%, which is the lowest level of the support from the population. In 2020, for example, was 74. Before that was even bigger, but now there is a kind of resistance from the people. So let's say more of the 1/3 of the population believe that they don't see progress in the accession process. If they support the membership, they perceive that based on the supposed economic benefits that can follow, improving standard of living, quality of life, etc. But as a factors that affect negatively will be factors that are tackling the constitutional changes, cultural trees of the identity, and loss of the sovereignty. So I would not say that in essence I'm an optimist, but however, we should be realistic. I don't say that there is less support for you, but I think that I can see that there is a less belief that the process is credible, that is fair, and then in certain period we will witness something, an outcome. Since so many years are, I would not say lost, but we spent so many years in waiting. And this could be, I think that this could have been done differently. So that will be my opinion. Thank you. I hope I was not too long. I didn't enter into specific dates, but
it was okay. It was okay, and I will get back to that. What could have been done differently, also on the part of the European Union as negotiation process as such. I think you showed some of I would say interesting facts, and very much the fact that the enlargement is a political process. It has very little to do with law as such. Yes, you have different conditions, you have the process which is written in the treaty and so on, but then you have first and foremost a political decision, and then all these additional conditionalities can happen. I just have one question at this point, just perhaps to elaborate a little bit on this last how would you say, condition, wish, something you would need to do regarding the Bulgaria and the change of your constitution. You think this is possible, or this really depends on the political will and the I would say depends on who in coalition is and how much they would sort of like abide by this additional condition you are now confronted with?
There was a treaty, there is treaty with Bulgaria, that is treaty of friendship, good neighborhood relationship and cooperation from 2017 that should that predicts setting a commission to overcome the historical not disputes, I would not say, but historical differences. You know, the Balkan itself is a very complex environment. It used to be a crossroad, and these issues should not. My point should be not part of the negotiation process. There should be something happening outside of these processes if there is a political will. Now, since the country faced veto from Bulgaria because the language, etc., that the language should not be used as an official language because Bulgaria does not recognize Macedonian language. That language is always connected with identity. Then there was to unlock the processes. There was a certain French proposal that was predicting changing the constitution once again. I don't know. There's a constitution that will never been changed since we are changing the constitution. It's our too flexible. To change the constitution once again, introduce the Bulgarian minority, or in Macedonia we don't use the word minority, but the communities or the people that are part of that are from the other people, and because I guess it has a pejorative meaning in the general public, but they're communities. So to use the communities to move forward the work of the commission, and then these processes to be solved during the process of the negotiation. The proposal was accepted by the government, but it was without a general consultation of the general public from the opposition. So it was a proposal outside of the sphere of public, and of course got a negative feedback. To change the constitution, you need a special majority, and that was not reached. The general public was against it. So I don't necessarily think it was against having the minorities. We have different groups within the constitution, but the way how it was imposed on the country, putting as a conditionality, and how this will, for example, reflect in the future, because the other issues may arise with not only with this neighbor, with another neighbor, because obviously we have all of us, not only Balkan countries, all of them have many. Now, this issue is not on a political scene. The party that gain a majority of votes is conservative, Demo-Christian right parties that follows the general tendencies in EU. And how these processes will be unlocked, I'm not very certain, I'm not very sure. Maybe not in the beginning, maybe in a certain period of time. Right away, I don't think that will be first priority. There is a good happening, I think there is proposed a new ministry for the European integration. Previously, we have a secretariat, so maybe it will take some competencies and will push the processes forward. And somehow we are, I guess, the proposal that is now that majority of the, instead of a unified consensus during the cluster, to be solved with a specific majority in it, so the process can move forward. So I don't know, I don't have a really the prediction how this will go. However, I will say that I'm against of introducing of this type of solution, not because I'm working a lot of my work is devoted to protection of the minorities, different types of rights, and I know that they should be protected, but putting that as a conditionality and ultimatum, I don't think is a positive outcome.
Yes, the right step. Thank you. Now, if we move to Fjoralba and Albania, and considering the anniversaries I mentioned, this is another one. We are in the months of when Albania was awarded candidate status. That was in June. In June 2014. It's not as long as North Macedonia, but it's still 10 years long, long period. And again, my question would be the same as for Natalija. What has happened in between? Where are the negotiations right now? How do the Albanians feel about entering the European Union again after a bit shorter, but still long enough time as if I consider when you were granted the candidate status, please.
So thank you very much for the invitation. I really appreciate talking among colleagues, but also interacting later with students. Because we're living in very interesting times, especially now that the European Parliament is also holding elections, talking about more EU. I think it's important, not only in the candidate countries, but also in the EU countries. With regards to the enlargement process, I very much had similar points with my colleague for North Macedonia, but I'd like to start with the positive notes and then to discuss later what could be improved and what are some of the challenges in the accession process. So I'd like to start by saying that I still believe, not because I'm a EU law lecturer, but I still really believe that enlargement policy is the most successful instrument of foreign policy of the European Union. And through the enlargement policy, the European Union is able to be a great influence in the region, an actor that is dominant in the region. Without having this enlargement instrument, I would say that the reforms that are being done would be less and less, but also the influence of the EU in geopolitical and domestic arena would be less. So I still consider it a successful instrument in terms of EU foreign policy. Of course, that this instrument has been part of the evolution that has happened in different European councils. And also, EU is an organization that evolves during times, and it's the sum of its crises, as Jean Monnet would say, and somehow also the enlargement policy has been a response to different crises, to different historical moments, or different political, economic, and geopolitical moments. I would say that for Western Balkan countries, unfortunately, the enlargement process has been much more difficult than for the Central and European countries, the one who succeeded in 2004. And we've been facing with different challenges that they were not present in your countries. And this has been translated into more conditions in terms of conditionality. For example, the political conditionality, which is one of the first Copenhagen criteria, has been interpreted in an evolutive way, including not just rule of law, but reforms in the public administration, reforms in the judiciary, fight against corruption and organized crimes, which were not really present or defined as such in the previous accession. And also, it is harder for us because now European Union in its enlargement policy does not require only normative compliance. all the progress report on the enlargement package for our countries ask for a credible track record implementation. And we know that if you focus on the implementation, the puzzle becomes more difficult because the implementation does not depend only on the capacity to translate a law and transpose it, but also in the ability of the country, in the ability of its public administration, and also other actors to implement it properly. And in a country like Albania, which had a very severe communist system, where private and market economy was not developed very much, even during the transition, much of the criteria to be implemented are hard. However, still, this harder conditionality, I think it's a good exercise for us because it helps us as a country to go deeper and deeper into reforms and not just to go in this mere normative compliance, which sometimes was even false or not really going into the transformative aspects as were required by Brussels. Also, we face with the enlargement fatigue, which is very much discussed. And as my colleague Natalija was putting it, we are every day and each time facing the nationalization of the enlargement process. Enlargement policy now is considered like a policy stick that it is triggered by different political parties whenever they have an elections. So as a professor, whenever there is a summit, I go and check what are the next action in the member states, because I'm very quite sure that they're going to trigger this opposition or pro-enlargement to appease their electorate. So it's not more anymore like a process just based on the merit of the country, on the reforms on the country, but being nationalized, it puts us in this circle that it's like you're never enough. Even if you do painful reforms, or the one in North Macedonia, or also in Albania with vetting, I'm going to touch upon it lately, it's never enough. And sometimes I make fun and say to my students that it looks like EU is like a prima donna. It has all our attention in the scene. I mean, it's our favorite singer in the scene. But on the other hand, it behaves like a prima donna because it's very hard to please. Sometimes we do a bunch of reforms and we think we did the most of it, but it's never enough because the political situation in EU member countries is such that does not favor the EU accession. So I would say that there is a need to revive the relationship and also to have a clear perspective. For the Central European, Eastern European countries, there was a clear date, but now when I mention dates for our region, they're illusory and they're not trustworthy. Let's recall that we had an initial date of 2025 for Montenegro and Serbia, saying that if you fulfill the reform, you have the clear perspective of succeeding. Then we hear Charles Michel and other high representatives calling for another date, 2030. But in this part of the region, I don't think that there is much trust that these dates are real. So the lack of trust, which is also reflected in the last polls, I was surprised by the polls conducted by IRI, the Institute for Republic Institute for Democracy in the region, and it shows that although in Albania the public support for EU is like 90%, which is very high, the trust that the EU is really serious in accepting us is 62%. So I see a big gap. Although we are like a very pro-European country and we have big aspiration to enter into the European Union, the trust we have in the process and the credibility that the EU is really going to accept us is 30% lower. And we have an issue of trust I think we have to work on. I mean, I know that we as a country, of course, didn't do all the things perfectly. And we also have somehow betrayed the trust of European Union, but not doing all the necessary reforms sometimes and pretending we've done the reforms. So reviving this relationship based on trust and being open and transparent about each other's paths, I think is a moment we need to also review. However, in these long years of accession, there are stories that I consider success stories, and stories we need to reflect and maybe repeat it and draw some lessons. Because I still consider EU as an intuitive organization, which really learns by its own mistakes and its own success stories. And I think this example I'm going to bring and also open for discussion some examples we can work on. First example is the visa liberalization. I think it's a good example or a good success stories because the process was conducted in such a way that the European Union was very concrete in the targets it put on the candidate countries. It had around 50 conditions to fulfill, Albania, but other neighbors as well, in terms of borders, surveillance, also biometric passports, strengthening the police, and all these targets were fulfilled, and the reward was very concrete, visa liberalization. And when I say it's concrete not only for the country, but mainly because of the citizens. Visa liberalization created the opportunity that students might go abroad for an exchange, learn a new language, improve their language skills. Business people could move and see business opportunity, create their own networks. And these profits were very tangible, not only for the country, like a flag, now we have visa liberalization, but were tangible results for the citizens. So this is a story where we can learn that EFEU, in its conditionality, is not vague, is not abstract, but it's concrete, and asks for concrete measures to be undertaken by the candidate countries with concrete rewards, where the citizens get something that is tangible, is a success story. And I think visa liberalization is considered a very good success story in Albania. I know that this is very controversial, but I still consider the justice reform in Albania a very unique one. I know this justice reform in North Macedonia has not produced the expected result. I've also studied the justice reform in Montenegro and Serbia, but I would rather stay of the position, and I'm really convinced of that our reform is very, very, very deep. And I'm waiting for it to produce the results. But just to mention some of the features that makes it a success story for us. The justice reform in Albania was not a cosmetic change. It was really a painful reform because it changed all the structure of our judiciary. It established 8 new institutions, 3 vetting bodies that vetted the judges based on their wealth, assets, background, integrity. And the vetting of judges is also very, very deep. It goes how they accumulated wealth in decades, if they are able to prove the legitimate resources of themselves, their spouses, their children, their parents and grandparents, going in very, very deep investigation about how judges accumulated a certain level of richness. It goes into their background, who are their relatives, who do they meet, which sometimes might also infringe their right of privacy, an issue that was also brought before the Venice Commission, but which was somehow considered proportional. So it's a very deep exercise. And as a result of vetting, so I have some last figure. From 732 judges and prosecutors being vetted, only 300 were confirmed in office, 230 were dismissed, and 102 resigned. So we have a loss because we have lost around 300 judges and prosecutors for the system, and I consider it a loss. But we are deeply reviewing our system in terms of integrity, background, professionalism, and I hope that this would be an exercise, a shock exercise, which would really embed these values of accountable judiciary for a long stay. And also, the accountability has been increased, and we also had this problem of high political figure being untouchable. And because the judiciary were weak, and although we had some very flagrant examples of corruption of high politicians, they were never against the bars. But with the Special Prosecutor Office that is fighting organized crime and also corrupted politicians, we have different charges against Deputy Prime Minister, Minister of Health, Minister of Finance, mayors, judges, prosecutors. And for the first time, this culture of impunity of the strong man is being tackled, and I consider it a success. It was a real problem in this part of the country the lack of impunity, and all the transition years of Albania. We have heard stories in these 30 years of people being untouchable, and I think that these are good news. SPAC also recently gave some data that it has confiscated 41 million euros that were money of organized crime, confiscated bars, restaurants, and hotels. So I think we have some concrete figure, some good track records. But of course, it's not easy, because these 8 new institutions have to prove themselves that they are sustainable, and that despite the future attacks they might have by politicians or organized crime, they're going to be able to stand on their feet. The public administration reform also is another good example. We have enacted the laws of depoliticization of the public administration, a special status of civil servants that was also because of the European Union. And to conclude this part maybe of the success of the European Union, I'm an old school, but I consider the normative power of EU success stories. Also at the market economy level. For example, I mentioned that Albania has suffered a very, very tough communist system where the private property was not allowed for 50 years or among people in Albania. So these notions of private economy, even during the transition time, were not really developed well. And we have very, I call them naive cartels in Albania. You can find in the news people working at the wheat sector, companies saying, oh, we're here, we're going to fix the price of the wheat in the market. Or you have naive cartels of travel industry saying that, oh, we're going to fix the price at this level, and they go up in the news. And they really didn't get that in a market economy. It's not the operator who fixes the news. It's the market economy. It's the demand and supply. And thanks to you, we have the laws of competition. We have also the authority of competition. Of course, they can work better, but they are here to learn us what is a market economy, because we're still struggling to find these forces of competition well established in the market. And in this regards, I consider EU establishing the standard of market economy, consumer protection as good example of transferring knowledge, of transferring best practices. Of course, there are challenges, and each of these elements I've mentioned has also its advances and its problems. But I think that overall, if we revive the relationship, if we are open to learn from our mistakes and make it a process that is tangible for citizens, then we can spur somehow the process. Otherwise, if we stay in this perennial waiting room forever, I'm sure that we're going to become depressed. I mean, if you stay in a closed room and you are a healthy person, you're going to have some disturbs. And I think it's the same for the region. If you keep us locked in the perennial waiting room forever, of course, we're going to perform less. Of course, we're going to become more vulnerable. So we need some innovative and also creative solution to revive the enlargement methodology in order to be credible and feasible and tangible for the citizens. I can go forever. There's a problem of being lecturers and professor. I think everyone in this web room finds it common. So please stop me whenever I'm going beyond the time.
Don't worry. I was just thinking when you were talking about your judiciary, it was, I can't remember, was it 2 years ago, something like that? We had a webinar like this I think Hungarian ICANS section organized it, and it was on constitutional courts. And I remember, I can't remember the Albanian professor who attended it, but she said you had severe problems because your constitutional court is not functioning, simply because there is not enough judges, because of what you just mentioned. So yeah, there are problems, but I still think, and I agree with you, there is a positive outcome. In a way, the European Union stimulates you, and it stimulated us before we entered, to sort of like make certain things right.
Yeah, sure,
and
sure.
this also had to do with the past and everything. our history and so on. So there
Yes,
are positive outcomes, but I agree also with the negative. And I also agree that only concrete measures and concrete conditions bring concrete results. Unless you're in a place which is very much vague and everyone can say, well, but this is not enough. It's sort of like abstract. And in a way, it leaves a door for arbitrariness. So it's not a good way to step. But yeah, Fjoralba, for the moment, thank you. I will from the Western Balkans move to Kerry. And Kerry, yes, is a UK person. She mentioned she's a Brexit one, not being in favor of Brexit. Yeah.
I wouldn't be here if I was.
But I want just said that I would like you to well, you can comment also what you've heard, but I would also like you to focus on 3 countries which given the candidate status recently, so to speak, Ukraine and Moldova first, and then later in December last year, Georgia. And before starting this conversation, getting public, we're discussing, Kerry was many times, has been also in Georgia. I was saying that we had in Georgia Erasmus student, and she was saying to me that the reason why Georgia was giving the candidate status is mainly were in the hands of people. People were the reason why they gave, why they were giving the candidate status. And I have that in mind also with what is going on recently in Georgia in terms of getting the law. But perhaps I will give you the floor, and then you will say how would you consider these 3 countries getting a candidate status, aspirations of for the European Union, but also I think it's a very clear question with, I think, sort of like which can only go into one direction, but I wonder whether you agree or not. Can the enlargement at all happens in time of war, which is the case, for instance, in Ukraine, which I have my own opinion. I don't think that is possible, but let's hear you. You know more about these countries definitely than I do. Please.
Yeah, so thank you for the invitation. It's really nice to, meet up again. And as you described, my knowledge or interest in the EU and EU enlargement in particular comes from kind of at least 3 sources: being British, having gone through the rocky path of Brexit, living here in Poland for over a decade now, so still a relatively new EU country, and then working as I do on the kind of further to the east, so principally Moldova and Georgia, and to some degree Ukraine as well. So I feel that I've kind of lived in different epochs or phases of European integration with positive, negative, or kind of ambivalent views on all those different things. I mean, I think my first comment is really there is no credible alternative to joining the European Union, whether it happens very quickly, medium term or long term. I think all of the countries, including from your region, from Eastern Europe, from the South Caucasus, it's almost a kind of natural drag. It's a centripetal force which is bringing countries in. And of course, the route to becoming members is long, it's protracted, it's difficult, it's demanding, it brings about Euroscepticism and populism, but nevertheless, I still think there is that natural kind of momentum in place which makes this going to happen sooner or later, and it's up to the EU as to how the methodology is defined and whether we give a kind of time point, a timetable for this, or whether we let it flow is really the decision to be made in the EU capitals. If I look back at the past 20 years or so of European integration and what I recall about the 2004-2007 enlargements, from a current vantage point, I think it's pretty clear that the whole thing was a success. I like that the colleague mentioned normative power. Sometimes I think it's difficult to gauge or really measure what the concrete effects of enlargement were and what membership has meant for countries like Poland and Slovenia and others. And sure, we can look at trade, we can look at economic indicators, we can look at standards of living. And I think it's fair to say that generally becoming part of the EU did raise all of those important economic indicators in most countries by and large. But I think also the EU has been a very effective normative power, for example, in conflict resolution. You know, Poland and Germany were, you know, centuries long enemies, and with Poland joining the European Union in 2004, this was a kind of moderating effect on relations between those two countries. And I think there are other countries as well where membership became this infrastructure for conflict resolution. If you look at the business environments in the countries that joined in 2004, prior to that, they were captured states, there was a higher level of corruption. Becoming part of the EU was definitely a tool or a momentum which helped countries overcome those types of issues. And I think there are plenty of other examples. You know, poverty has been alleviated in most countries to a degree that joined in the early 2000s. And I think even, you know, party politics has become stabilized in the countries that joined. And I think to a certain degree that can be attributed to becoming a member of the European Union. That's all very good. But of course, 2004, 2007, 2013, those previous three waves of enlargements happened in a fairly calm, relatively calm, fairly secure period. There wasn't a war occurring on Europe's doorstep. There wasn't the rise of populism and nationalism that's appeared in some EU countries. And so in the work that I've been doing with colleagues here about what we're calling the next enlargement, the context is, as we know, so unstable and so unpredictable. And because of that, this whole kind of context of the next enlargement is also, of course, highly geopolitical. That was not the case before. And there's also this sense of speed or haste, that we've got to get it done, that there's a limited window of opportunity that did not, as I recall at least, be the case in 2004 and 2007. I think from the moment that the countries received candidate status or that started screening until they actually became members, it was between 5 and 7 years. You know, if you look at Ukraine and Moldova now, they've moved from being partners to being accession states in less than 2 years or 2.5 years or so. So this is another really novel characteristic of this current unfolding enlargement prospect that simply was not the case before. And, you know, this kind of changes the whole the whole rules of the game. And either we accept that and move forwards quickly and soften the EU's conditionality, or we stick to our existing modus operandi and, you know, don't give a deadline, that we just kind of keep things open, which personally I think is not the best methodology. I don't think that we should rush to let Moldova and Ukraine first and foremost in, but I think it would be a huge mistake to reduce the momentum, to not be clear about the sequencing, what to expect when, and that probably applies to to Albania, North Macedonia, etc. as well. I think it would be a mistake to leave it open, as was the case before, and that we should have clearer timeframes, sequencing, what we can expect by when. And I think that's important for public opinion in the EU states and in Moldova, Georgia, and Ukraine, to give it a frame, a sense of what to expect, so we don't let it drift, so we don't let Russian influencers have too much opportunity to intervene and to derail what everyone wants to occur. So that's my kind of overall view in terms of how it was, how it currently is, and how it perhaps could be. Now, when it comes to Georgia, Ukraine, and Moldova, obviously there's a lot that unites them. Previously, all parts of the Soviet Union, and their trajectories after 1991 have kind of been similar. But I think we shouldn't, you know, over-exaggerate the similarities between the three countries. Obviously, Ukraine is a country at war. Ukraine is huge. Moldova is a very small country with almost half the population living already in the European Union countries anyway as Romanian citizens. And then, of course, Georgia has its own particular difficulties right now. Georgia has moved from being previously a very stable, clearly democratic, pro-EU, anti-corruption country to being the current situation where the Georgian Dream government is has a huge distance away from the vast majority of civil society who are pro-EU. And as you mentioned, you know, one of probably the key reason why Georgia was given candidate status at that moment in time was a reward and a recognition of people's capacity and faith in the European project. What are the issues, you know, Moldova, Georgia, and Ukraine, aside from the war, aside from the frozen conflicts in Georgia and Moldova, they have the same problems that other candidate countries have: rule of law, corruption, lack of independent judiciaries, weak democratic institutions. There's the same problems wherever we look. And those problems are not going to be solved overnight, never mind the issue of the war going on. And so what I think we need to do is to configure a gradual or a so-called staged approach for those three countries to get closer to the EU. I know we're going to talk about the European political community a little bit later, but I think with these countries in particular, we have to keep the beacon very bright. We have to be very precise from the EU side. I mean, I'm not an EU citizen anymore, so what am I saying all this, you know, but to provide a clear perspective and to set out a time frame as to what they can expect, you know, by when, and what are going to be the firm steps towards that. What I haven't addressed here is how that can be compromised with the Western Balkans countries joining. And I think, you know, are we thinking about a big bang approach like before, or whether we're going to let Ukraine and Moldova move to the top of the queue ahead of your countries who have been waiting in line for over a decade? So that's how I will end. So that's my first response to the questions.
Yes, thank you. You see, there is this, I agree, this new paradigm. You said new characteristics, new approach, perhaps, which is considering these three countries, which again, I think was, and it supports what you said, made out of, let's say, a more or less a symbolic gesture, so that all three countries are sort of like reassured they have a place in Europe. They have a place in the European Union. That's it for the time being. And I would add to this, and then perhaps we'll go another circle with Natalija and Fjoralba, and then you, Kerry. I will add to this. So let's say first how Natalija and Fjoralba think about these Western Balkans and these three countries having all a candidate status. Is there any, not problems, but what are your consideration about it? And then something else that Kerry said, there is no alternative. This is true. I also think this is true. But then there is a nuances of alternative ways, in a way. We have people which talk about differentiated Europe. Well, we talk about, even within the European Union, there is much talk, there was much talk about multi-speed Europe, not all doing everything at the same pace, at the same time, and so on. But we also have people considering, should we have a differentiated memberships? So we have a member, let's say a full member, and then some sort of a member which is not a full member, rights. I don't know, this is debatable, but is this an alternative? And then when we said, yeah, European political community, something which arose out of Macron's, I think, wish, and probably his wish were far-fetched, not only considering this, but this huge group of countries which are European countries, which belong to Europe, having these meetings several times but the meetings can increase. They can meet up on more frequent occasion than they currently are. But considering that this is some sort of a group of people who are supposed to have similar values, and for European Union, values are important. It's based on values. So similar values, but not the aspiration or clear prospect, at least at this certain point of time, clear future, short future, to be a really member of the European Union. So is this alternative? Is this a possible alternative for the time being? And again, what do you think about this differentiated Europe in terms of having different status of members within the European Union as an alternative, so that everyone can join, everyone can be a member of the European Union, but there is a difference between members. Natalija, can we start with you?
Yeah, sure, thank you. Enlargement, despite being a successful story, let's say, for a foreign policy of the EU, is because we have here a different perspective. It's a one perspective when you see as a professor, another perspective when you see as a practitioner, as another perspective when you see as a policy researcher. It's another perspective. The point of view is can be different. So let's say, if we consider it a successful story, because despite the general outcome, it creates a positive input in society, positive reforms that move society, make society better in any case. However, enlargement is not always high, let's say, on the EU political agenda. Not is always a clear process. We speak about considering the indicators of the enlargement. So different crises that happen influence the processes, as well the narratives, and speed, let's say, the processes, or put it back. However, the solutions, let's say, if we analyze that from the public policy perspectives, when you have solutions are not very well thought or not discussed with a general public, it cannot produce the results that are sustainable. So many times the policy, let's say, enlargement policy, now I'm speaking from my perspective of you and my country, point that there are solutions that are extinguishing to fire, or they are not sustainable, or they can produce results for a short run and they cannot produce expected results on the long run. For example, in 2050, we have migrant crisis where Western Balkans were put on spot. The solution was proposed, but it didn't have the led to the general stability of the region. Now, granting candidate status to Ukraine and Moldova is a sign of a change of the EU, and that understanding that maybe there is a need to be invested in peace and security and economic growth in the whole Europe. So that's me. But from the other point, puts the geopolitical interest in sense of in an opposite way of the European conditionality that we were faced so long time ago. Now, where to put the balance? Geopolitical interests are of course important, but as well the core values among which should be united. It's a difficult question. Additionally, this process is always depending on the political happenings in EU. For example, now the elections, how will affect the future situation. And basically, we don't know. Despite the Copenhagen criteria that countries that were in this process of accession need to fulfill, which were very demanding, and there were additional Madrid criteria connected with a separate type of functionality of the institution, that the criteria that were never set for the other countries. Now, I agree. I agree for conditionality. I agree for a frame. For a frame that has the certain types of movement and certain outcomes in the end. I will not say that if we left the process to be fully open and without any kind of strict conditions and terms will produce any type of result. I think it will go the process backwards. From the other side, I think that all the bilateral issues should be taken out of the question. not to transform into the bilateralization instead of the Europeanization. And I will say that we should stick for the conditionality, but as well for the credibility of the process. So how you will secure the credibility of the process, putting the geopolitical interest in first, comparing to the core values. I'm not, there should be a different mechanisms, and maybe set a different membership or this different type of association that can be as well feasible. I don't think that this is not necessarily bad. I think worse is when you don't have a clear outcome, or when you stuck a long time in a certain process and you don't know how the process will raise. But if you have a clear outlet, clear framework, and clear indicators how the membership or eventual membership will change, I think that this will bring a different dynamic of the process and will increase the performance of the countries.
Thank you, Fjoralba. Will you continue? Thanks.
Yes, sure. With regard to the first question, if we consider unfair the granting of the candidate status to Ukraine or to the other countries, compared to us, where we had to wait for decades, I'll start just by picturing our side of the story. So Albania got initially the potential candidate status in 2000, and it waited for 10 years almost in 2009 to get the candidate status. And we applied after the candidate status to open the accession talks with the EU, and the accession talks are not still open. So we had in 2022, almost another decade later, the first intergovernmental conference where we declared that we are going to open accession talks, but we are 2 years later and the talks have not started yet. And when we see the situation in Ukraine, maybe there would be certain segments of our society saying, okay, this is not fair, but I would say that that is fair. Because granting candidate status and a clear perspective to Ukraine, especially, but also to Moldova and Georgia, is according to the EU treaties. So if we go to the treaties, the core criteria is to be a European country. And I think that European country means embedding all these values and feeling European. And we can see the civil society in Georgia, we can see Ukraine defending European values. And of course, they are European countries, so they deserve to go in the European family. And in this geopolitical situation, why not? We can have some hands being granted to help them, because situations are not favorable. What I would consider then unfair maybe in the future was if the European Union would say to the Western Balkan countries that you will wait until Ukraine, Moldova, and Georgia be ready to accede, then you're going to accede as a bloc. I think that would be unfair. Because we know that the entering of Ukraine depends also on the revision of agricultural policy in European Union, which is a hot topic. It depends on the revision of the budget. So there are certain issues that if they condition the accession of the Western Balkans with the accession of Ukraine and Moldova and say that we're going to enter as a region when all the new countries are ready, that would be. But as the situation stands for now, I think that that it's perfectly okay to help this country to prosper, to do the reforms, because the threats that they are living into are threats to the European values, are threats to European family. So I see that a good mobilization of the European Union, but also of other countries towards Ukraine, Moldova, and Georgia is very, very good, and also somehow support. With regards to the different plans of the EU accession, I also have read the Franco-German proposal of the top expert, and also some recent study from Serbia, and also CEPS Institute about state integration. What would be my two comments? First, I'm kind of not supportive of this status of associate membership, because my concern would be creating a different class of citizens, a class of citizens with more rights and another class of citizens with less rights. So again, my concern is, what does it mean for the citizens to have associate membership? And also another issue would be at administrative level, how the European Commission would administer all these circles in terms of capacity administration. It would be like a Europe a la carte, where everyone is taking what they can chew. But administratively, I find it challenging also for the European Commission. But as I mentioned, my core, let's say, concern is not creating different layers that would translate at the end of the day different rights for same European state citizens. With regards to the new approach to the accession talks, what I like is the recent initiative of the European Commission, the growth plan. So I think that having kind of this initiative that would create staged integration or tasting integration before membership, formal membership, would be beneficial, because I'd turn to the point that it would grant to the citizen very tangible and concrete results. So with the growth plan, having this infrastructure, mobility, investments, networking, exchanges, I think that we would feel you closer to us, citizens would benefit, and we would have this bottom-up approach to integration instead of a top-down approach. And this resonates me also to the project itself, because the European Union started as a bottom-up approach, as a European community, and then it is leading towards a more political or constitutional community. That's why I think that initiatives that are targeted for the Western Balkan, that help us to access to the internal market in terms of free movement of people, businesses, access to SEPA, in order that we can somehow be parts of exchanges and banks and money transfer, transfer of capitals, somehow would help us really learn from the process, improve ourselves, understand the integration better, and also create the muscles to become members, full members at a certain level. But having this associate membership, I'm not a big fan of the idea. About the European political community, I would say that, of course, it's a good initiative, having in consideration the threats, the political threats we're living in. And why I consider it important? Again, learning from what has happened in different crises. We had the COVID crisis, and what we have seen by the vaccine diplomacy was that initially this part of the region was forgotten. So the EU in the first stage was thinking about helping each other, helping the citizens of the European Union without thinking what's happening to our neighbors. And the situation was somehow exploited, and the first aid we had in terms of vaccine was the aid from Russia and China, and then from Turkey. And the vaccine diplomacy shows that if there is a crisis, and we are going into this period of crisis by crisis, if the EU is not close to us, other influences would come. So I see a value in the political community in solving the crisis Europe is facing. The energy crisis, the digital transition, maybe we are the age where artificial intelligence is expected to get boom. So what would happen next with the social transition? These are common crises that affect us the same, despite of being EU member states or candidate countries. Energy crisis, digitalization, social crisis, demographic crisis are common crises. So having a community where we can discuss it without being left alone, but to respond to this crisis is good. The other side is how it's going to operate if the European political community would be just a summit, having some speeches, having some declarations, that I don't really see a material value in it. If then it is translated into concrete action with concrete measures that are beneficial for all the community, then it would have a value added. But still I have question how the decisions of the European political community are going to be integrated with the European Union organization, and how it's going to operate as an outside circle. So there are lots of questions, but at least in principle, I would like it to be more concrete with concrete action and not just a summit with speakers.
Thank you. Kerry, about these alternatives, and also I add another thing. We've mentioned the time frame. We've mentioned the President of the European Council say 2030 is a feasible date, sort of like more in terms of pushing for accelerated time frame, and even deciding on a time frame, not being somewhere in the clouds looking for it. Your thoughts about that?
Yeah, I mean, I agree with the other speakers. And my point is always that the stakes are so high. I mean, the stakes felt very high in the run up to 2004, but the stakes and the consequences of enlarging, or rather not enlarging, within a reasonable timeline, I think are so frightening and so serious that, you know, our efforts should be in finding feasible solutions. You're right. I mean, multi-speed Europe, gradual integration, staged concentric circles. Over the past decades in academia, there's been so many descriptions. I like the idea of staged, because staged sounds a little bit more credible. It sounds like there's going to be very clear blocks and timeframes that a country A, B, or C has to move from, and in so doing can gain fuller access and participate more fully in decision making in the European Union. Gradual sounds too wishy-washy. Gradual just sounds whenever, whatever. So I think that, you know, we should be lobbying for the right terminology. You know, call this what it is and stop faffing around with multicentric, whatever they're called, really. I agree that the European political community is, you know, a solid basis. It's something which is like 40 plus members and growing. It's an important forum. It's a big statement of solidarity. But how would it work?
UK is in it as well.
But this is not my next sentence. Yeah, exactly. So it's wishy-washy, which what the Brits really like, apart from when it comes to our interests. And but it's an important statement. It's a little bit like the CSCE, OSCE of the early 1990s, which was really important for bringing together voices, which is really important. But the EPC as an alternative to eventually full EU membership is not the same story, but it brings the Brits back in. And I think that that is a good thing. And it can also provide footholds for countries like Armenia. Armenia wants to recalibrate its relations with the EU. The EPC can be a nice, comfortable kind of route into that. But just to kind of repeat, you know, what I said, the EU is the most important show in town. There's not a credible alternative, and we've got to manage expectations on both sides. And I think that does mean talking about deadlines, which goes against the kind of culture of enlargement being, you know, merit-based, etc., etc. It's done when it's done. But I think this time it calls for more rigor in terms of deadlines, you know, the more for more principle. And, you know, with the Western Balkans and with Moldova, Ukraine and Georgia, you know, they're well practiced at this. They've been in the Eastern Partnership for over 10 years. And through participating in that, you know, they've become the most important trade partners, the visa-free regime as well, Erasmus, all these things were mentioned. So we're not starting from scratch. There's always already rather strong familiarity, working groups, people know each other. And the people who were involved in the screening from Moldova's side, they know their EU counterparts. So I think we have to acknowledge that this is work that's already in progress, and not, you know, not assume it's just a mountain ahead of us. Yeah.
Thank you. Perhaps the last round, just to sort of like wrap it up. So what do Natalija think about the date? What do you think, if you think, and this goes also to Fjoralba, but mostly the last question for Kerry, basically because she's probably looking at it through different glasses, so sort of like what the coming European election will bring if we can think about it, if it's possible at all at this point of time, in terms of the future enlargement. So, for instance, a couple of minutes each, okay? Natalija, please.
Thank you. About the creating a now new proposals that I saw read the French-German proposal. It has the elements that can be feasible and reachable, but it has the elements that need structural reforms. And the structural reforms right now, I don't know how this will be, how they will happen in EU. For example, to bring this decision, you need a still decision from all the member states to introduce certain changes. What I like in the proposal, I don't like the date. We always have too many dates, and we are never able to reach them. What I liked was that during the process, the council to decide with a qualified majority, and in the end to have that decision from all the member state. Yes, this will brings the process faster, and then will stop all this dispute that we had. From the other side, the European political community, it's not a full package for us. It's not what we want. We want to be, of course, to be part of the EU member state. And this European political community seems like to be a space where you don't have a clear, the countries are not participating into the decision making. So let's say for us, it's not quite an alternative. About the state accession, yes, I would say that is a positive thing. But from the other hand, we never have the problem, or we never face issues when they're related to the economy. So that means we always have a different association, stabilization agreement, financial support that we move the country forward. However, this agreement reached its point. So probably we need a certain another instrument that will get us closer to this internal market. Although theoretically, not always economic integration leads to the political integration. It happened in some time for certain countries that have similar political system, but from the other hand, it doesn't grant any kind of success. However, I will be again. I think that having something that is very more realistic, with a specific target and goals, can make the process, can speed the process, and to get out from this place where we now in constantly waiting something to start, actually. Although we have those reforms, there is need something to be like some clear result to see not only the conditionality to work in our benefit, finally. I would love to see that. Thank you.
Thank you. Fjoralba, please.
So I start maybe on a very positive note, and I'm on a more negative or pessimistic note, but sometimes I see the enlargement process in relation to EU stuck in this, I say it's in this transition between the old that is not ready to die and the new that is not ready to get born. And I'm paraphrasing an author here. What I mean by that, so there is a need for a treaty revision. That is also the elephant in the room. And from the EU side, despite the goodwill to promote enlargement and to be realistic with enlargement or giving realistic dates, the core problem is the revision of the treaty. And the elections that are happening now, and I'm happy that also students are here and encouraged to vote, would be very determining about the future of EU, on the ability of the member states and also the leadership of the union to revise it. Because without the proper revision of the treaty, despite the reforms we can do in this part of the region and the miracles we can do in terms of political progress or economic progress, the EU would not be ready. And we're going to finish up having this waiting room in the region. Just to mention it by date, the European Commission has said Albania should open the talks till 2016. And it was 2018, the General Affairs Council has endorsed it, and then also the European Council in 2019 endorsed it, but we had Macron saying that there would be no enlargement without having a treaty accession, and there are years, 5 years passing, and we did not open the talk. So I think that we should be clear that without having a revision of the treaty, the discourse is kind of theoretical, and we will be staying in the waiting room. So while we'll stay in the waiting room until the EU is the new one, the new EU with the new treaty is getting ready, we need to create some valvula of breathing, so we can breathe in this waiting room and not get depressed, as I mentioned earlier. Having the staged integration, I think is a good valvula of breathing, because it would make us closer to EU policy, a social policy, or internal market, which are feasible and concrete and tangible. And I think that being closer economically and having economic reforms with enhanced political conditionality would somehow even force our political parties and leading political parties to continue with the reform. It is true that the political criteria in this region is very complex, but by having some good competition in the region, like the growth plan, for example, methodology, just shortly, what I like also in the growth plan is kind of competition, that if a country does not fulfill the criteria, then the money is going to go to the country who fulfills the criteria. And having these innovative instruments of positive competition in the region, where the country who fulfills the political criteria probably would create more pressure. And the other element I would add is please keep supporting the civil society as monitoring mechanisms. Sometimes we do these very big reforms in our countries, like the judicial reform, but actually very few organizations has the capacity and also the financial instruments to have sustainable projects to monitor the reforms. And without having the national actors to monitor it, the EU or the member states would not really have like good shadow reports. So I think even supporting grassroots organizations, civil society, and businesses directly, not through the IPA instruments or through state budget support, but directly, would be another valve so we can breathe until the EU is ready to revise the treaty. A short note, because then for me it's hard to stop.
Thank you. Kerry, please.
Yeah, just a few maybe kind of random comments in a way. Yeah, we've got the EU parliamentary elections coming up very soon. And I mean, I think what will be interesting about them is the level of turnout. I'm not quite sure citizens are going to be voting in the different countries with a potential EU enlargement in mind. I think, people, at least in the country where I'm living in Poland, they would use European elections as a kind of warning shot to their governments about things that they're, not happy with or very happy with. So I think it's more, direct interest, the economy, the environment, jobs, and what have you. I'm not quite sure if we'll be able to make any big conclusions about support for enlargement from the European elections. Certainly in Poland, no MEPs are kind of campaigning or really mentioning those issues. I think with the previous rounds of enlargements, if you were to ask people on the street if they support the idea of Ukraine joining the EU, people would say, yeah, absolutely, it's solidarity. But of course, when it comes to the nitty-gritty and people start thinking about how the big Ukrainian agricultural sector is going to start affecting jobs and farmers in other EU states, that's when opposition rises. And as you know, Poland is a kind of partner with Ukraine, and yet over the past few months there's been a lot of activism from the side of Polish workers who are not happy with the deals that Ukrainian drivers and whatnot. So there's, I think, there's a tipping point at which EU citizens are not happy with the idea of enlargement due to the costs. I agree with this idea, and I like this idea of a waiting room with lots of air to breathe. It has to be a waiting room when there's going to be a departure from that waiting room, and the destination is going to be quite good. I mean, I'll turn this around a little bit because, you know, the conditionality and the support from the EU side brings about change. You know, it can bring about positive change, normative transfer, but with things like the rule of law, anti-corruption, lack of independence in the judiciary, badly equipped public administrations, the responsibility is also on the candidate and accession countries. There's, you know, the EU cannot march in and reroute or rewire your judicial systems from scratch. These are things that require thinking and commitment and accountability on the side of the accession and candidate countries. So, you know, there's only so much we can say about the weaknesses in EU policies, because this has to come from the other way around. And I agree, it's where civil society and experts and academia need support to hold governments to account, to improve the conditions there.
Thank you. Economy was many times mentioned, and I think economy, internal market, used to be this sticking point, this thing that glue member states together, the initial goal, let's say, and what still attracts them and attracts the candidate countries as well. The first one, I would say, among other things, and the most important one perhaps as well. So I would wrap up by saying that obviously this is not a white-black story. It has many nuances. It has many positive things, like reforms that need to be done in candidate countries, that needed to be done in our countries, perhaps still some to finish, to be honest, but also this perhaps negative point of view, which adds up the argument that perhaps some innovative methods and approaches should be thought about and perhaps even fulfilled, so that in a way, I would say the EU should not disappoint members who wish to accede, but at the same time remain a credible actor in the region. So I would like to thank all the panelists. That was excellent, I think. Thank you for your time. Thank you for your thoughts and ideas. And I would like to thank those who are with us as well for listening. I hope you enjoyed the debate. We will continue with this. This is not the last time we debate enlargement. I hope we will not debate the enlargement within the same countries in 10 years or 20 years time. This is my wish, that something will move and will move in the right direction. And with this thought, I conclude, and I thank you all again for being with us, and in particular, all three professors accompany me and sharing their thoughts with us. Thank you.